As time went on, Sam's sense of desperation deepened. He could feel himself slipping away. The fun, energetic boy who once loved to play outside, drawing and dreaming of adventure, was now a shadow of himself. He had lost all hope, and the dark secret he carried about felt like suffocating him. Every day felt like an endless struggle, a battle he didn't know how to win. He began to act out at home, his temper flaring for no apparent reason. Sam would lash out at his parents, pushing them away, feeling that they would never understand the turmoil he was going through. At school, his outbursts were getting worse. Teachers noticed his aggression, but instead of understanding the root cause, they only scolded him for misbehaving. He had become angry at the world, and it seemed like no one cared enough to help him. Sam's fear of Ruth intensified, and with it, his isolation grew. He started avoiding her as much as possible, retreating to his room whenever she was near. But no matter how much he tried to avoid her, Ruth was always there, watching him with her calculating eyes. She never stopped reminding him that he was hers and that no one would believe him if he ever spoke out. Ruth had made herself the center of his world, and every moment with her was a reminder that he had no control over his own life. Sam was now trapped in a never ending cycle of fear, guilt, and anger. The weight of the secret was unbearable, and the thought of telling anyone seemed impossible. Ruth had made him believe that telling anyone would destroy his life, and Sam was too terrified to take that chance. The idea of the truth coming out filled him with dread, and yet something inside of him told him that he could not keep this hidden forever. He couldn't continue living in silence, but the road to freedom seemed so far away. As Sam's mental and emotional state deteriorated, Ruth became more manipulative and controlling. She knew he was beginning to crack under the pressure of the secret, so she turned up the heat. Ruth would pull him aside in private, whispering cruel, threatening words in his ear, telling him that if he ever told anyone, he would never see his parents again. She made sure to remind him that no one would believe him, not even his own family. She would twist the truth, saying things like, "They would think you are just trying to get me in trouble." Sam, do you really want to destroy your family's life? Your parents will hate you. Her threats became more elaborate. Sometimes she would tell him that if he spoke out, he would be sent away to a far off place, or worse, she would tell him that something terrible would happen to his parents. The fear that Ruth instilled in Sam was unrelenting. He felt completely powerless. The thought of losing his parents terrified him more than anything, and Ruth knew how to exploit that fear to keep him silent. The power imbalance in their relationship had become suffocating. Sam felt as if he were walking on eggshells, never knowing what Ruth would do next. Her threats and manipulation were wearing him down, and he could feel his sense of self slipping away. The boy who once trusted easily now lived in constant fear, unsure of who to turn to or how to escape. The more Ruth twisted his reality, the less Sam believed in his own ability to break free. One evening, when Sam's parents were finally at home together, he saw a chance to tell his father what was happening. His father had just come back from work, and Sam noticed that he seemed a little less distracted than usual. This was the moment Sam had been waiting for. The moment when he could finally speak out. He walked up to his father, his heart racing with fear and anticipation. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Ruth," Sam said, his voice trembling. His father looked down at him, raising an eyebrow. "What about her, son?" Sam took a deep breath. This was it. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say another word, Ruth appeared in the doorway. She stood there, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Sam with a sharp gaze. Without a word, she walked over to him. Her presence, a suffocating weight. Sam froze. His word caught in his throat. Ruth's power over him was too strong, and once again he couldn't speak. His father looked at both of them, confusion in his eyes. Is something going on here? Ruth, with her usual calm demeanor, stepped forward and smiled. Sam is just being difficult, dear. He was about to say something silly. Don't worry about him. Sam wanted to scream, but he couldn't. Ruth had once again shut him down, silencing him with a simple gesture. His father looked at Sam, waiting for an explanation, but Sam remained quiet. The fear inside him was too much to overcome. His father sighed and patted him on the head. Go to your room, Sam. We'll talk later. Sam turned and walked away, feeling defeated. Ruth had won again. His attempt to speak up had failed. As he retreated to his room, the weight of hopelessness settled over him. No matter how hard he tried, no one would listen. He was all alone in his struggles. One afternoon, after Sam had been particularly withdrawn and distant, Ruth cornered him in the hallway, her eyes full of malice. She grabbed him by the arm, pulling him into a small room. Sam could feel his heart racing in his chest, his body trembling with fear. If you ever tell anyone what's been going on, I'll make sure you regret it, she hissed. I'll make sure you never see your parents again. No one will believe you. I'll ruin you, Sam. Sam felt a wave of terror swept over him. He had always feared that Ruth would make good on his threats. But now, standing in front of her, he realized that she was serious. He felt as if he were trapped in a cage unable to escape. With no way out, Ruth had controlled every aspect of his life, and now it seemed like she was going to make sure he paid the price for even thinking about speaking out. Sam's mind was spinning. He couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't live with the fear and guilt any longer. But what could he do? Ruth had already taken everything from him. His sense of safety, his peace of mind, and his ability to trust anyone. He had no power. He was a small boy, and she was the only one who seemed to have any control over his life. That night, Sam lay in his bed, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't sleep, couldn't find peace. He wondered if there was anyone who could ever believe him. The secret had become too much for him to bear, and the weight of it pressed down on him harder than ever before. After Ruth's threat escalated, something inside Sam changed. He had reached the end of his endurance. For the first time, he realized that he couldn't keep living this way. He couldn't let Ruth continue to control his life, even if it meant losing everything. Sam realized that the only way out was to find someone who would truly listen to him, someone who would believe him. One day, when his friends were out, Sam finally took a chance. He grabbed the note he had written weeks ago and shoveled it into his bag. He couldn't do this alone anymore. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. This time, he was going to make sure that someone found the truth. As Sam walked to school that morning, his heart felt heavy. But for the first time in a long while, there was glimmer hope. He had made the decision to fight back, even if it meant facing the consequences. He was ready to take that first step. Ruth's hold on him was about to break, and Sam was finally ready to let go of the fear that had held him captive for so long. After deciding that he couldn't carry the burden alone any longer, Sam made a choice that terrified him. He would tell someone. He couldn't keep living in fear, and he couldn't stay silent. His teacher, Mrs. Olumide, had been kind to him, and though he had never fully trusted anyone with the truth, he felt she was his best chance. He knew he had to tell someone, anyone, what Ruth had been doing. That day at school, Sam waited until the bell rang and everyone had filed out of the classroom. His heart was pounding in his chest, his palms clammy with nerves. He slowly approached Mrs. Olomide, who was sitting at her desk organizing papers. She looked up at him with a warm smile, but her smile faded as she saw the serious expression on his face. Sam, is everything okay? She asked gently, her voice filled with concern. Sam could barely breathe, but somehow he managed to speak. Mrs. Elomide, I need to tell you something, he whispered, his voice shaking. It's about Ruth. She's been hurting me. Mrs. Olumide's eyes widened with shock, and she immediately stood up. What do you mean, Sam? What's been happening? Sam felt his throat tighten, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he could go on. He looked at her, then down at his shoes, and then with a deep breath, he told her everything. He told her about the threat, the manipulation, and the terrible things Ruth had been doing to him. It felt like a weight was being lifted from his shoulders. But at the same time, the fear didn't go away. He was terrified of what Ruth might do if she found out he had spoken. Mrs. Olumide listened carefully, her face serious but kind. She didn't interrupt Sam. She just allowed Sam to speak. When he finished, she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Sam, you've been very brave. I'm so glad you told me. We are going to make sure you are safe. For the first time in a long while, Sam felt a sense of relief. Someone believed him, and that belief gave him the courage to keep going. The moment Sam finished his confession, Mrs. Olumide knew that the situation was very serious. She couldn't let this go unnoticed. She immediately told Sam that they needed to act fast and that she would make sure he was safe. She called the school counselor who had worked with many children in difficult situations before. Together, they devised a plan to get Sam the needed help. Mrs. Olumide reassured Sam that he had done the right thing. No one should ever make you feel the way Ruth has, she said, her voice steady and firm. We are going to make sure you are protected. Sam, though still terrified, felt a glimpse of hope for the first time in months. He had spoken out, and now it was time for the adults to step in. But as much as he felt relief, he couldn't shake the fear that Ruth might find out what he had done. She had been so controlling for so long, and the thought of her turning on him now was terrifying. Mrs. Olumide immediately called Sam's parents, and after a brief conversation over the phone, they were both asked to come to the school. While waiting for them to arrive, Mrs. Olumide spoke to Sam in calming tones, reminding him that he was no longer alone. They had to keep calm, but the next step were crucial. Sam's parents needed to understand the gravity of the situation, and Ruth's hold over Sam needed to be broken as soon as possible. When Sam's parents arrived at the school, they were both confused and concerned. They had no idea what had been going on in their home and couldn't understand why Sam had been so withdrawn. Mrs. Olumide carefully explained the situation, including Sam's confession about Ruth's behavior. She emphasized how serious it was, assuring them that Sam had been brave for speaking up. At first, Sam's mother couldn't believe it. She looked at Sam, who was sitting quietly, his face a mixture of fear and relief. It was hard for her to imagine the woman that they have trusted in their home for so long could do something terrible to their child. No, this can't be true, Sam's mother said, her voice trembling. Ruth, she's been with us for years. Are you sure, Sam? Sam nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. He looked at his mother. He was afraid of what they might say, afraid that they might not believe him. But he had already told the truth and he couldn't take it back. His father too seemed stunned. He looked between Sam and Mrs. Olomide, trying to make sense of what was happening. But after a long silence, he finally spoke. Well, I'll make sure this is taken care of, Sam. We'll make sure she can't hurt you anymore. Sam felt a rush of emotion. The relief was almost overwhelming, but so was the fear. Ruth had been part of their lives for so long, and he knew that confronting her would not be easy. But with his parents now on his side, Sam felt a sense of strength he hadn't felt in months. He was no longer alone. Later that day, Ruth was called into the school to meet with Sam's parents. When she arrived, she seemed calm and collected, her usual confident demeanor in place. She greeted them with a polite smile. But the moment she saw the serious looks on their faces, she knew something was wrong. Sam was sitting beside his parents, his eyes filled with anxiety. What is all this about? Ruth asked, her voice cool. Why am I here? Mrs. Olumide didn't waste any time. Sam has shared with us some very disturbing things about what has been happening at home. He says you have been hurting him and threatening him. Ruth's face instantly froze, her smile sleepy. She straightened her back and looked at Sam with a narrowed eyes. That's a lie, she said sharply, her voice a little too cold. Sam has always been a troublemaker. You shouldn't believe anything he says. Sam's heart raced. He could see Ruth's action, and the fear of what she might do to him when they returned home gripped him. But his parents were not backing down. They had had enough, and Sam's confession had already opened their eyes. We believe our son, Sam's father said firmly. We are not going to let this go. You are no longer welcome in our home. Ruth's eyes flickered with anger, but she said nothing more. She stood up, and without another word, she left the room. Sam watched her go, his heart pounding. It was over. Ruth was finally gone. After Ruth's departure, the family faced a difficult period. The trust they had placed on her for so many years had been shattered. The emotional toll on Sam was immense, but with the support of his parents and Mrs. Olumide, things slowly began to improve. Therapy sessions were arranged for Sam, and with time, he started to open up about his experiences, finding the healing he so desperately needed. Ruth, meanwhile, faced legal consequences for her actions. The police were involved, and an investigation was launched into her behavior. It didn't take long for other victims to come forward, and Ruth was arrested for her actions. She was charged with child abuse and manipulation, and she would never again be able to harm another child. For Sam, though the road to recovery would be long, he had taken the first step toward healing. The love and support of his parents, combined with the help of caring adults like Mrs. Olumide, gave him hope that he could rebuild his life. Though Sam would carry the scars of his experience for years to come, he began to rebuild his sense of self. With his parents' love and support, he was able to regain his confidence. He went back to school, and slowly he found joy in his old hobbies again. He reconnected with friends he had pushed away and learned to trust again. In therapy, Sam walked through his trauma, and he began to understand that what had happened to him was not his fault. He was no longer the frightened silent boy who had kept everything bottled up. He was a survivor, and he knew that no matter what, he would never allow anyone to take away his voice again. Sam's journey was far from over, but with the love of his family and the strength he had found within himself, he knew that the future could be brighter. He had faced his fears, and he was no longer afraid to speak the truth. Moral lesson. Let us be guided, and let us know that as parents, no matter how busy our schedules are, we should have time to listen to our children. Whenever they are about to speak to us, let us put everything aside and listen to them. If the parents of Sam had listened to him on time, he wouldn't have fallen into this trouble that he had. Let us be guided. Thank you for viewing. If you are coming across this channel for the first time, kindly like, subscribe, and comment. Turn on the notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever I drop a video. Thank you.